I didn't take the job because I believed in the stories. I took it because I needed the money. Seasonal caretaker positions are rare, and when one came up for a mountainside shrine halfway between nowhere and a forgotten forest road, I jumped on it. The pay was modest, the responsibilities vague, and the promise of being alone for months at a time seemed more like a perk than a drawback. At least that's how it sounded when the offer letter landed in my inbox. I drove up the winding roads with a car that coughed more than it purred. The forest pressed close, walls of cedar and pine rising like dark cathedrals on either side. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the trees were narrowing, leaning together above me, blotting out the pale sun until only thin streaks of light fell across the hood of my car. The air thickened too, damp enough to beat against my windshield and fog my glasses when I cracked the window. The shrine appeared suddenly, tucked between two ridges, its roofline visible first, then the wooden gates with their flaking red paint. I parked by a half-collapsed shed and stepped out into the silence. It was a silence that was not empty but heavy, full, like the forest itself was holding its breath. No bird calls. No rustle of small animals. Just the faint drip of water somewhere behind the shrine, steady as a metronome. A man was waiting for me by the main gate. His shoulders were hunched as if he had been standing there too long, and his eyes darted quickly over the treeline before they landed on me. He wore a jacket patched at the elbows, boots thick with dried mud, and in one hand, he held a battered notebook. "You're the new one," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. I nodded, feeling suddenly smaller than I had a right to be. "Caretaker," I said, trying the word on my tongue. He didn't smile. He just held out the notebook. "This has everything you need. Rules. Notes. Things to keep you from making mistakes." When I took it, the leather was soft from years of use, the corners rounded from constant turning. A strap held it shut, though it was frayed to threads. Something about the weight of it unsettled me. The man rubbed at his chin, eyes flicking again toward the forest. "Don't take this lightly. It's not a normal job. You follow the rules, and you'll last the season. You don't," he trailed off, leaving the words hanging like a warning bell. I tried to laugh, but it came out weak. "Superstitions." "Not superstitions," he said firmly. His gaze was steady now, pinning me in place. "Instructions. Survival." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, his figure swallowed quickly by the trees. No goodbye. No handshake. Just gone. I looked down at the notebook in my hands. My reflection stared back from the brass clasp, tired, uncertain, trying to look braver than I felt. The shrine loomed above me, its wooden beams slick with moss, the roof sagging under decades of rot. Stone lanterns lined the path, their interiors blackened, though I couldn't tell if from fire or something else. The carved faces, I didn't notice them right away. Not until I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the damp soil, and saw them staring back at me from the posts, from the beams, from the very wood itself. Dozens of them. Some small, no larger than my palm. Others stretched long, warped across planks. Each face was different, some with eyes hollowed, others with lips pursed as if about to speak. None of them smiling. The silence pressed harder then, as if waiting. I swallowed and opened the notebook. The first page was handwritten in cramped ink, the letters uneven as if scrawled in haste. Caretaker rules. Read carefully. Follow always. That was all the first page said. I stood in the dim light, damp air sticking to my skin, and felt the weight of the forest pressing close around me. Whatever job I thought I had signed up for, it wasn't this. And yet, I stepped forward, notebook in hand, into the shrine that had been waiting. The light inside the caretaker's quarters was thin, filtered through warped shoji screens that rattled faintly whenever the wind pressed against the walls. I lit the lantern I'd found near the door, the flame flickering to life with a hiss of oil. Shadows stretched long across the floor, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the true thickness of the night pressing in. The notebook sat heavy in my lap. Its cover smelled faintly of smoke and mildew, the kind of scent that lingered on your hands after you touched it. The strap creaked when I unfastened it, and the first page curled upward as though resisting me. Caretaker rules. Read carefully. Follow always. The handwriting was jagged, impatient. Whoever wrote it had not been trying to make it pretty, they wanted it remembered. I turned the page. Rule 1, do not look at the carved faces for more than 3 breaths. If you feel eyes on you, lower your gaze. Counting will not help. Looking longer changes them, and you. I frowned, glancing toward the nearest wall. Even in the weak glow of the lantern, I could make out a carved face in the wood just beyond the sliding door, lips pursed, eyes hollow. It looked ordinary enough, if eerie. 3 breaths. What could possibly happen? I let my gaze linger, testing it. 1. 2. 3. The moment I reached 4, I felt something shift, not in the wood, not in the grain, but in my chest. A crawling sensation under the skin, as though recognition had passed between me and the face. I snapped my eyes down to the notebook, pulse kicking against my throat. Ridiculous, I told myself. Just nerves. Just suggestion. Still, I didn't look back. Rule 2, if someone knocks after midnight, do not answer. Do not speak. Do not move. Wait until the 3rd knock passes. This one made me laugh, though the sound died quickly in the empty room. Superstition, plain and simple. Don't answer the door to strangers at night, hardly groundbreaking advice. Yet the phrasing was odd. Do not speak. Do not move. Almost as though silence itself mattered more than the door. My eyes flicked to the clock nailed crooked above the doorframe. 10:17, the hour hand crawled toward midnight. The forest outside had gone so quiet it was suffocating. The rule lingered heavier in my mind than I wanted to admit. Rule 3, offer water at dawn and dusk. Use the stone basin by the eastern steps. Do not use metal. Do not let the basin go dry. A memory stirred, the departing caretaker's eyes scanning the trees, his voice flat, follow the rules. Survival. I underlined do not use metal with my finger, though no reason was given. Rituals usually came with purpose, symbolic gestures, prayers, something. This one was clinical, exact, like an instruction manual. No explanation why. Only command. Rule 4, leave offerings untouched. If you find fruit, coins, or paper charms placed at the shrine, do not move them. Do not eat them. Do not burn them. They are not yours. The hairs rose on the back of my neck. I remembered the path leading up to the torii gate, small folded slips of paper scattered along the stones, coins glinting in the cracks. I'd stepped carefully to avoid them, thinking it was tradition, litter from tourists. Now the words in the notebook took on a sharper edge. They are not yours. Who placed them, then? And why the warning? The list continued, filling several more pages. Do not sleep in the western room. The paper walls do not keep them out. If you hear bells at dawn, wait until they stop. Do not search for the source. Carry salt in your left pocket. Replace it every 3 days. When walking the grounds, keep to the gravel paths. Do not step on bare soil. Do not enter the forest past the 2nd stone marker. If you cross unknowingly, do not run. Walk backward until you return. Each rule grew stranger than the last, moving from mere superstition into something colder, more surgical. There were no blessings, no gods mentioned, no divine rewards. Just threats implied by omission. What unsettled me most was the precision. Not avoid the forest but past the 2nd marker. Not don't wander at night but do not speak if they knock. Whoever wrote these had lived them. Had catalogued them. I closed the notebook with more force than intended, the clap of leather startling in the silence. The lantern guttered, shadows bending across the faces carved into the beams. For the first time, I imagined them listening. The clock ticked to 11:02. I told myself I didn't believe in curses. That rituals were comfort for the desperate. That I had taken a job, not a pilgrimage. Yet when I lay down on the thin futon, the notebook still clutched in my hands, I kept hearing the same words in my head, over and over, a drumbeat that would not quiet: follow always. Follow always. Follow always. The forest did not sleep, though it pretended to. The carved faces watched from the dark. And the rules waited for their chance to matter. I thought the first nights at the shrine would be lonely in the way cabins in the woods usually are, quiet, still, the sort of silence that settles heavy against your ears until you almost welcome the creak of the floorboards just to remind you you're not deaf. But the silence here isn't restful. It has weight, like the air itself is pressing in on me. The forest surrounding the shrine feels wrong in a way I can't quite pin down. During the day, shafts of light spear through the cedar branches, illuminating drifting dust and tiny motes of pollen. It should be beautiful, but every time I step outside, I feel watched. The trees grow impossibly close together, roots winding like veins over damp soil. There's moss everywhere, so thick and wet beneath my boots that it muffles every step. I keep expecting birdsong, the whine of insects, maybe even the occasional rustle of a deer in the underbrush. But there's none of that. It's a forest without an animal voice, and the longer I stay, the more unnatural that absence becomes. At night, the quiet deepens into something worse. The lanterns I light barely push the shadows back, and the shrine itself creaks as if shifting in its sleep. The wood here is old, older than my grandparents', the beams so dark and swollen with age that they look like they might bleed if cut. When I lie down to rest, I find myself straining, listening, convinced that the silence is covering something. And sometimes, just barely, at the edge of hearing, I think I catch whispers. Not words, just breathy threads of sound slipping through the cracks in the wood. The shrine's carvings don't help. There are dozens of them. Faces carved into the lintels, into the beams that hold the roof, into the posts around the courtyard. Each one is unique, though all are crude in the same way. Wide, staring eyes. Lips pressed too tightly together or pulled too far apart. Some seem almost human, others resemble masks stretched past the point of comfort. When I arrived, I told myself they were meant as guardians, warding off whatever spirits the forest harbors. But now, when I pass them by lantern light, I swear they've shifted. It's nothing dramatic. I don't catch them moving outright. Instead, I'll notice that a mouth once closed seems slightly open, or an eye carved smooth now carries a shallow groove like a pupil. When I stop and stare, they're motionless, unchanged. But the moment I glance away, even for a blink, the certainty hits me that something is different. It's the kind of trick your brain plays when you're overtired, I tell myself. Like seeing a coat hanging in the dark and thinking it's a person. But that explanation isn't enough to quiet the unease. One night, unable to sleep, I sat with a candle stub in the main hall and just watched them. The wood grain rippled beneath the flicker of the flame, lines and swirls that looked almost like veins under skin. I followed those lines with my eyes, tracing them over foreheads and cheeks and down to thin, rigid necks. The longer I stared, the harder it was to think of them as carvings. They looked alive, just very still, like they were holding their breath, waiting for me to look away. When the candle guttered out, the faces seemed to lean closer in the sudden dark. I've taken to keeping my lantern with me everywhere I go, even when I step outside to relieve myself. The light is the only thing that keeps the carvings pinned in place, or at least that's how it feels. Still, the unease follows me. Last night, as I lay awake, the wind picked up and slid through the trees. The branches rubbed against each other, groaning like old bones. But beneath the wind, I could have sworn I heard something else, a faint murmur, voices layered atop each other, whispering just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. I told myself it was nothing. I'm overtired, that's all. But this morning, when I stepped outside, I noticed the ground near the outer posts was disturbed. The moss there had been flattened, as though something heavy had pressed down on it during the night. I don't know why, but I didn't want to touch it. I'm trying to follow the rules the old caretaker left me. Offer water at dawn and dusk. Keep the offerings untouched. Don't answer knocks after midnight. Don't look at the carved faces too long. That last one sounded absurd when I first read it, just a relic of superstition, but now, after these nights, I find myself obeying it more strictly than the others. Because I think the carvings want me to look. Every time my eyes slide over them, there's this tug in my chest, subtle but insistent, urging me to linger. And when I resist, when I deliberately look away, the silence around me swells, like a held breath, like something waiting for me to give in. The days are easier. The sun scatters light across the courtyard, and I can convince myself I'm imagining things. But the shadows beneath the eaves stay heavy even in daylight, the carved faces watching from their perches. When I sweep the floors, I feel their eyes on my back. When I pour water into the offering bowls, I catch glimpses of them in the surface reflections, distorted, stretched, as if they're pressing their way into the liquid. I haven't told anyone. Who would I tell? The village is a long walk down the mountain path, and the people there already looked at me strangely when I first arrived. I don't want to give them another reason to treat me like an outsider. So I keep it to myself. But I'm starting to dread nightfall. I used to think the forest was empty, that the silence meant safety. Now I know better. The forest isn't empty. It's holding its breath. And the shrine is listening. It happened because I forgot myself. Because I lingered too long. The carvings have been bothering me for nights, the way they seem to shift in the corners of my vision. I told myself I wouldn't look at them, that I'd respect the rulebook, no matter how superstitious it sounded. But when you live surrounded by silence that presses against your skull and faces that wait in the dark, temptation doesn't arrive in sudden bursts, it seeps in slow, like water through stone. That evening, I lit my lantern and walked the perimeter of the shrine. The air was damp with fog, cool enough that each breath rose pale and lingering. My boots sank slightly into the moss, and the smell of wet earth clung to me. I stopped at one of the larger posts, where the wood grain swirled like knotted muscle. A face was carved there, lips tight, eyes too wide, as if it had been caught in surprise. I should have walked past. But something in those eyes made me pause. The longer I looked, the more detail emerged. Tiny grooves in the pupils, shallow lines in the lips. A faint curl in the corners of the mouth, so subtle I couldn't tell if it was a frown or the beginning of a smile. I leaned closer. The candle flame quivered, casting faint shadows into the grooves. The eyes seemed to deepen, as if hollow, as if they reached further back into the wood than they should. My chest tightened. My gaze wouldn't break. The rulebook's warning, "Don't look at the carved faces too long," drummed at the back of my mind, but my body betrayed me. My breathing slowed, like I was matching a rhythm that wasn't mine. The wood grain rippled. The grooves seemed to shift, stretching wider, sharper, and then, I blinked, jerking back. My lantern flame sputtered, nearly dying. The face was the same. Or close enough that I couldn't be sure what I'd seen. My heart was hammering too hard to stay. I forced myself inside, shut the doors, and lit 2 more lanterns. I told myself it was nothing. Just fatigue, the mind playing tricks on me. But the unease clung to me as I lay down. I pulled the blanket tight, kept the lantern by my side. At some point, exhaustion overtook me. When the knocking started, it felt like part of a dream. 3 sharp raps on the shrine's front doors. My eyes snapped open. The lantern was still burning, flame low and steady. I glanced at my watch, 12:41 a.m. My stomach dropped. Never answer if someone knocks after midnight. The sound came again. Not fists. Not knuckles. Dull, heavy, like wood striking wood. I sat up, blanket clutched in my fists. Knock. 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 The shrine beams groaned around me. The carved faces on the walls seemed to lean in the lantern glow, shadows stretched long across the floor. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep my breathing quiet. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, let me in. My voice. It came from the other side of the door. Please. Open the door. The words were mine, but wrong. Thinner. Hollow, as though echoing through a long tunnel. I froze, every muscle locked. I know you're in there. My voice again, closer now. Whispering through the wood. I wanted to scream, to bolt for the back entrance, but my legs wouldn't move. The rule was clear, never answer if someone knocks after midnight. I clung to it like a lifeline. The voice shifted. Let me in. It wasn't just mine anymore. A chorus, faint whispers underneath, overlapping, repeating. Each syllable dragged, stretching longer than speech should allow. The wood of the door flexed inward, only slightly, like someone leaning against it. A creak echoed through the hall. I grabbed the lantern and backed away. My shadow danced wildly against the beams. The carved faces looked sharper, more defined, their eyes catching light like wet stone. The knocking started again, harder, faster. Not in rhythm. A scatter of blows from multiple points on the door, from the sides, from the beams. The entire shrine shook. My teeth rattled from the vibrations. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence after was worse. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lantern burning low, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak of the wood felt like footsteps. Every flutter of the flame made me think shadows were crawling closer. When dawn finally arrived, pale light spilling over the forest, the fear ebbed enough for me to move. I opened the door a crack. No one stood outside. The moss in front of the threshold was undisturbed. But on the wood of the door itself, faint grooves had appeared. Long, thin scratches that hadn't been there the night before. They radiated outward from the center, as if something had pressed its face to the wood and dragged itself down. I didn't touch them. That morning, I poured water into the offering bowls with shaking hands. My reflection trembled in the surface, fractured by ripples. For a moment, I thought I saw my lips moving though I hadn't spoken. I looked away quickly. I haven't told anyone about the knocking. But I know it won't be the last time. And I know I broke the rule. Not fully. I didn't answer. But I looked too long. I stared at the carved face until it stared back. Now it knows me. The next morning, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The shrine was too still, the air heavy, and every carved face seemed to follow me with quiet judgment. I needed noise, people, something that wasn't creaking wood or whispering leaves. The village was about an hour's walk down the narrow mountain road. The path curved through dense cedar forest, the air thick with resin and damp soil. Birdsong came and went in bursts, but always with strange pauses, as if the forest itself was listening. I forced myself to keep moving, boots crunching on gravel, until the trees thinned and rooftops appeared. The village looked frozen in another time. Low wooden houses leaned against one another, paint faded by years of rain. A few paper lanterns swayed in the breeze, their colors washed pale. Laundry hung limp from sagging lines. And the people, when they saw me, they stopped. Not entirely, not rudely. But in subtle ways. A woman watering her steps let the water run until the bucket overflowed, eyes fixed on me. A group of children paused mid-game, marbles clenched in small fists. Their gazes were too steady, too careful. I offered polite bows, nervous smiles. Some nodded back, but their eyes followed me even after I passed. The only place that seemed open was a small shop at the corner of the square. Its sign was worn, hand-painted, with a bell tied to the door. I pushed inside. The air smelled of dried herbs and old wood. Shelves leaned heavy with jars of pickled vegetables, packets of rice, bundles of incense sticks. Behind the counter sat an elderly woman with hair tied in a silver knot, eyes sharp beneath her wrinkled brow. "You're the new caretaker," she said, before I could even greet her. Her voice was rough, but steady. She didn't smile. "Yes," I admitted. "Just for the season." She studied me a moment longer, then slid a small basket across the counter. "Rice, tea, dried fish. Practical things." I thanked her, fumbling for cash. Her hand lingered on the coins a beat too long before sweeping them away. "Don't stay out after dusk," she said, almost absently, arranging bundles of herbs. "The mountain doesn't forgive those who linger." I hesitated. "Because of the shrine?" Her hand stilled. Slowly, she looked at me. There was no amusement in her eyes, only weariness. "The faces remember," she said. A chill threaded up my spine. She must have noticed my reaction, because her voice softened, just slightly. "My brother was caretaker, long ago. He thought the rules were superstition. Thought himself stronger than the mountain." She placed a bundle of incense in my basket, unasked. "He disappeared before his second season ended. Nothing left but his lantern. And the faces on the wood." I swallowed hard. I'm sorry." She waved the words away, though her hand trembled faintly. "We live because the shrine endures. The rules are not for questioning." There was finality in her tone, like a door closing. I left the shop with my supplies, but the village still watched. A young man leaning against a wall tilted his head as I passed. A child whispered something to his friend, both staring wide-eyed. Even the stray dog lounging in the shade lifted its head, hackles rising. The walk back up the mountain felt longer than the walk down. The forest seemed to press closer, branches arching low, blocking the light. I could feel the basket handle cutting into my palm, my thoughts circling the old woman's words. "The faces remember." By the time I reached the shrine, dusk was already bleeding through the trees. Shadows stretched long across the courtyard, painting the carved faces in deep relief. For the first time since I'd arrived, I noticed just how many there were, dozens, maybe hundreds, covering beams, posts, even stones at the edge of the forest. Some were worn smooth with age. Others looked freshly cut, edges sharp, grooves deep. I set the basket down inside and lit my lantern. The flame flickered against the walls, and the faces seemed to breathe in the shifting light. I thought of the shopkeeper's brother. Of his lantern left behind. And I wondered if somewhere in the grain of wood, in the curve of a carved lip or the hollow of a carved eye, a memory of him still lingered. That night, I stayed awake long past midnight, listening to the wind scrape against the beams. No knocks came. But in the silence between gusts, I swore I heard whispers rising from the wood. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman was right. The faces were remembering me. The following days blurred into a rhythm of small rituals. Sweep the courtyard. Replace offerings. Light incense. Whisper the rules to myself like a mantra, just to make sure I wouldn't forget. But the rhythm never felt natural, only borrowed. As though the shrine itself tolerated me only because I repeated what was expected. It started small. A face near the back wall, one I hadn't noticed before, seemed different. The mouth was open wider than the rest, lips curled in a grimace that looked too detailed, too raw. I told myself it must have been there all along. The human mind forgets, misremembers. Wood warps. Shadows change. Still, I lingered on it, staring too long, until a shiver chased down my spine. That night, the dreams began. I saw the courtyard filled with faces that weren't carved, but living. Their lips quivered, their eyes glistened wet in the lantern light. And in the dream, I walked among them, pressing my fingers to their mouths, trying to keep them from speaking. I'd wake drenched in sweat, hands trembling, breath shallow as though I had truly silenced them. By the third morning, I noticed another shift. A face near the doorpost now tilted slightly to the left. Just a degree, but I knew it hadn't been carved that way. I studied the grooves, the chisel marks, the wood grain itself. All fresh. As if someone had been carving while I slept. I started checking each face every morning, making mental notes. High cheekbones. Crooked teeth. Closed mouth. Open mouth. My eyes darted from one to the next like a paranoid archivist. And each day, something had changed. A new crack, a deeper line, a subtle shift of expression. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows bled long through the trees, I saw movement. Just the smallest twitch, the carved lip of a figure at the corner of the shrine curled higher. I dropped the bucket I was carrying. The splash echoed too loud in the still courtyard. When I blinked, the face was still again. Just wood. Just grain. But I couldn't unsee it. That night was the worst yet. I had just doused the lantern and crawled beneath the thin blanket when the scratching began. At first, faint, like a mouse nibbling wood. But it grew louder, rougher, dragging along the outer walls of the shrine. Scritch. 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 I sat up, heart hammering, listening. The sound circled the building, pausing by each carved section of wall. Then moving on. Like something with claws, carving as it went. I tried to tell myself it was an animal. A raccoon. A fox. Something ordinary. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, fresh shavings of wood littered the ground near the base of the walls. Pale, curled, and smelling of resin. And the faces, they were different again. One mouth hung open far wider than before, teeth jagged, tongue carved into a twisted knot. Another had eyes that slanted downward, sorrowful, with tear grooves cut into the wood. One face, the one nearest to my room, had no features at all anymore. Just a blank oval, smooth and waiting. Waiting for something to fill it. I couldn't bring myself to sweep away the shavings. They looked too much like skin. The villagers' warnings returned to me. The faces remember. But now, I wondered, were they remembering me, or were they becoming me? That evening, I lit every lantern in the shrine, their combined glow pressing shadows back into corners. I sat in the center of the room, eyes darting between the walls, daring the faces to move while I watched. Hours passed. The flames guttered low. The wood creaked, heavy and alive. And then, I heard it. A faint, wet sound, like fibers tearing. I whipped my head toward the eastern wall and saw it, the mouth of one carving widening slowly, edges splintering, as if pulled open from the inside. I stumbled back, knocking over a lantern. Its glass shattered, the flame hissing out. Darkness surged into the space like water. When I looked again, the face was still. Its mouth just slightly wider than it had been that morning. My hands shook so badly I couldn't relight the lantern. That night, I barely slept. The scratching returned, louder, closer, until I thought the walls might split open. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound sank into my bones. I felt it in my teeth, in the base of my skull. By dawn, silence returned. But the faces had shifted again. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. One of them, just to the left of the door, now looked directly at me. Its eyes angled, sharp and deliberate. And I swear I saw recognition in its gaze. Dawn came late, filtered through a mist so thick it clung to my skin when I stepped outside. My body felt heavy, as if I'd been carrying stones all night instead of lying restless on a bed. I stumbled toward the offering bowls with the water jug in hand. Rule 3, offer water at dawn and dusk. I repeated it like a chant, the rhythm of survival. But that morning, my steps dragged. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. By the time I reached the first bowl, the sun had already broken fully over the treetops. The light was wrong, sharp, accusing. I froze. My stomach dropped. I was late. The bowl sat empty, dry as if it had been waiting. My hand trembled as I poured water into it, too fast, splashing the edges. I rushed to the others, whispering apologies to the silent carvings as though they could hear. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll do better, please, it won't happen again." The forest offered no reply. Just that cloying mist, heavy and sour, curling between the shrine posts like smoke from an unseen fire. By dusk, I almost convinced myself it would be fine. Maybe the rules weren't exact. Maybe dawn didn't mean precisely when the first light broke. Maybe I was safe. Each one, filled to the brim, not with water, but with something thicker, darker. The liquid shimmered dully in the lantern light, viscous like oil. A foul stench wafted from it, gagging me. My knees locked. My heart sank into ice. I leaned closer, breath shallow, and saw movement beneath the surface. Tiny bubbles rising, popping faintly. Like something alive, something breathing in the filth. I staggered back, knocking my shoulder against the wall. My lantern swayed, shadows leaping across the carved faces. And then I saw it. The surface of one bowl quivered, rippling as if stirred by an unseen hand. Slowly, too slowly, the ripples spread until a distorted reflection formed. My stomach lurched. It wasn't my face. It was one of theirs. A carved face, wooden and hollow-eyed, staring back from the liquid surface. Its mouth stretched into a grin, sharp and splintered. My reflection was gone, swallowed whole, replaced. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. My heel caught on the edge of a mat and I nearly fell. The lantern shook in my grip. I forced myself to look again. Each bowl now showed a different reflection. Not mine, not reality, faces from the shrine. Some weeping, some sneering, some blank with expressionless hunger. And in one, in the darkest corner, I saw the blank oval face from the wall, except now it wasn't blank. It was me. My own features carved into the wood, reflected in the viscous liquid. My eyes hollowed, my mouth twisted, my skin etched into the grain. The sight rooted me to the spot. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. I was staring at the death of myself, carved and waiting, as though the shrine had decided my place among them. The scratching started again. Louder this time. Claws against wood, carving, tearing, reshaping. It circled outside, dragging from bowl to bowl, as though checking each reflection. I clutched the lantern tighter, but the flame flickered violently, threatening to die. My mind screamed to run, but where? Into the forest? Back to the village that wouldn't meet my eyes? I backed into the shrine center, surrounded by faces, bowls, and the endless sound of scratching. My skin prickled with cold sweat. Every breath tasted of rot. The reflections shifted. In one, the carved lips began to move, forming words I couldn't hear. In another, the eyes blinked. Then another. Until all of them, every bowl, every reflection, stared directly at me, mouths moving silently in unison. I clamped my hands over my ears. My chest heaved. My voice broke. "Stop, please, stop." And then, in the dead stillness, one reflection spoke. Not in a whisper. Not in mimicry. But in my own voice, warped and guttural, spilling out of the bowl like water pouring from a crack. "You are already carved." The lantern sputtered, the light dimming. For a moment, I thought the walls themselves would collapse inward. I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping, fleeing to the far corner of the shrine as if distance mattered. When I finally dared to look again, the bowls were still. The liquid calm. The reflections gone. Only the stench remained, sour and putrid, clinging to the air like damp cloth. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the shrine center with the rulebook in my lap, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. The words blurred, smeared from years of sweat and dirt, but one line pulsed in my mind like a wound. Offer water at dawn and dusk. I hadn't kept the rule. And now, the shrine knew. Dusk draped itself over the forest like a heavy shroud. The sky bled orange into gray, and the mist that had been hanging low all day began to creep upward, curling around the trunks, softening every edge. I hadn't left the shrine since the reflections in the bowls. My body felt brittle, like I might crack if I moved too fast. The rules sat open beside me, lantern light trembling across the pages. I traced each line with my finger, whispering them to myself like a prayer. But my voice sounded small in the cavernous silence, swallowed before it reached the walls. I nearly convinced myself the night might pass uneventful. That maybe the shrine had shown me its punishment already, and that would be the end of it. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. My head snapped toward the doors. My throat tightened. No one came here. No one ever came after dusk. The steps grew louder, measured, deliberate. My chest burned with the need to breathe, but I couldn't draw in air. My mind scrambled for the rules: never answer if someone knocks after midnight. It wasn't midnight. Not yet. But dread curdled in my stomach all the same. The latch rattled. Then the door slid open with a groan. A figure stood framed in the last threads of fading daylight. His back hunched, his clothes disheveled, hair wild and unkempt. My breath caught. I knew him, though I'd only seen his face once, on the day I arrived. The old caretaker. He shuffled inside, eyes wide, too wide, glistening with an unnatural sheen. His movements jerked like a puppet pulled on tangled strings. He carried no lantern, no bag, no sign of having hiked the twisting trail. He simply stepped into the shrine, as if he had been waiting just outside this entire time. My mouth worked soundlessly before words finally scraped free. Why are you here? He stopped in the center of the room, shoulders twitching, breath rasping in uneven bursts. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Just stared at me with those glassy eyes, reflecting the flicker of my lantern like twin pools of tar. Then his voice broke the silence. You need to leave. The sound was wrong. It was his voice, but hollow, layered, like two people speaking at once in fractured harmony. One tone deep, guttural, the other high and brittle. The words echoed strangely, vibrating in the beams of the shrine. He took a staggering step forward, knees bending at odd angles. The forest takes what doesn't belong. It takes those who fail. You don't understand, it learns. I pressed back against the wall, rulebook clutched to my chest. What are you talking about? His head twitched violently to one side, then the other, as if he was fighting with himself. His voice wavered, deep and sharp overlaying one another. It doesn't forget. Every face. Every voice. Every mistake. It keeps them. It feeds on them. My skin crawled. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I could still smell the rot from the bowls, clinging to the air, seeping into my clothes. You gave me these rules. You didn't warn me what would happen if, didn't matter, he hissed, cutting me off. His mouth opened too wide on the word, lips cracking at the corners. You would break them anyway. We all do. That's why you need to go. Before it, his body convulsed suddenly. His arms flailed as though yanked upward by invisible strings. A sound tore from his throat, high-pitched, shrill, not human. He collapsed to his knees, trembling, head bowed. When he raised his face again, my stomach turned to ice. His mouth was moving, but the voice that came out wasn't his anymore. It was mine. Don't you see, it said, warped and echoing, spilling from his lips in my exact tone. You're already part of it. I dropped the rulebook. My heart thundered so loud it drowned out everything else. My body screamed to run, but my legs were locked in place. The old caretaker, or whatever wore his body, staggered closer. His hand shot out, fingers clawed and trembling, reaching for me. His eyes were pits now, black and endless. His skin seemed stretched thin, paper over splintered wood. I bolted. I shoved past him, shoulder slamming into his frail frame. He crumpled, limbs folding the wrong way as he fell to the floor with a hollow thud. I didn't stop to look. I threw the shrine doors open and plunged into the forest, lantern swinging wildly in my grip. The path was half hidden by fog, the trees closing in on all sides. Branches clawed at my clothes, roots rose to trip me. My lungs burned, my breath loud in the oppressive silence. Behind me, somewhere in the dark, his voice, my voice, carried through the mist. You can't leave. You're carved already. I ran until my legs buckled and I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. The forest loomed, every trunk a shadowed sentinel, every branch whispering with the weight of watching eyes. When I dared to glance back toward the shrine, all I saw was the faint flicker of lantern light, swaying like a heartbeat in the fog. And silhouetted in that glow, just for a moment, was the old caretaker. Standing tall now. Perfectly still. Watching. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. After I stumbled back to the shrine at dawn, the air clung to me with a heaviness I couldn't shake. My limbs still shook from the run through the fog, but more than exhaustion kept me awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my own voice echoing from the old caretaker's mouth. The rules sat open on the floor beside me. My lantern had burned low during the night, the wick sputtering, casting wild shadows across the wooden walls. The carvings seemed deeper in the half-light, their mouths wider, eyes darker. I tried to focus on breathing, on the normal sounds of morning, cicadas droning, dew dripping from leaves, a woodpecker hammering in the distance. But even those noises felt staged, artificial, like a recording played to keep me calm. I needed to know what lay beyond the shrine. The path I'd fled along last night twisted into the forest, and though I'd never walked it far, a compulsion gnawed at me. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe desperation, but part of me thought if I could see for myself, if I could find what was hidden, I might understand what was happening. I left the shrine just after dawn, notebook clutched tight under my arm, lantern in hand though I didn't light it. The fog had thinned, but the air remained damp and heavy, smelling faintly of sap and rot. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The cicadas fell silent, the birds hushed. Even the crunch of gravel under my boots seemed muted, swallowed by the moss-covered ground. Then I saw it. A tree, broad and old, bark twisted like knotted rope. At first I thought the patterns were natural, the grooves of age. But as I drew closer, the lines resolved into something deliberate. A face. Not carved by human hands, not gouged with tools. The bark itself had grown into the features, sunken eyes, a crooked nose, lips slightly parted as if to whisper. Sap oozed from the cracks like tears. I staggered back, heart hammering. My first thought was that it was a trick of the light. But then my gaze shifted, and I saw another. And another. Dozens of trees, each bearing a face. Some weathered and barely visible, worn by centuries of growth. Others fresh, the bark still raw around their carved mouths, resin glistening. The air grew thick with the smell of pine and something fouler, decay beneath sweetness, like fruit left to rot in the sun. I touched the nearest trunk, and my fingers came away sticky with sap, clinging like glue. And then I froze. The face in front of me, round cheeks, crooked incisor, was my own. Every detail perfect. Even the shadows under the eyes. I stumbled backward, clutching my notebook to my chest, bile rising in my throat. My stomach twisted with a recognition that went beyond fear. This wasn't chance. The shrine wasn't keeping watch over its carved faces alone. The forest itself was keeping record. Every caretaker. Every visitor. Every mistake. It was cataloging us. The trees loomed in all directions, their faces turned toward me, countless eyes unblinking. My ears filled with a faint noise, a rustle like leaves shifting, but layered, murmuring. Whispers. Too soft to understand, too many to count. I spun in place, desperate to find where it was coming from. My gaze caught another fresh carving, lines sharp, still losing. A face I recognized, not my own this time. The shopkeeper from the village. Her mouth carved wide, stretched into a rictus grin. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and though the words were muffled, I caught fragments. Don't leave, they belong, more faces, always more. The trees leaned closer. I swear they leaned, though no wind stirred the branches. Their shadows swallowed the light, the path behind me narrowing as trunks seemed to shift, closing off escape. I forced myself forward, each step slow, boots sinking into the damp earth. The faces blurred together, eyes hollow, mouths cracked. Some wept sap, others seeped a darker fluid that smelled of iron. My pulse thundered in my ears. The forest wasn't just alive. It was watching. And it remembered. I don't know how long I wandered before the path spat me back toward the shrine. My clothes were damp with sweat and resin, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the notebook. When the shrine came into view through the thinning mist, relief hit me like a wave, but it was short-lived. The carvings on the shrine itself had changed again. Subtly, but enough to notice. One face had its eyes narrowed now, lips curled in anger. Another's mouth had cracked wider, as if mid-scream. And one, just above the doorway, was mine. I collapsed on the steps, gasping, chest heaving. The whispers still clung to my ears, faint but relentless. My skin prickled with the certainty that the forest hadn't let me go. It was only waiting. By the time dusk came, I was trembling with hunger. The forest hadn't let me eat. I'd tried earlier, fumbling with rice I'd brought back from the village, but every time I lifted a bite toward my mouth, a wave of nausea rolled over me so strong I had to set it down. My stomach gnawed at itself, twisting and hollow, yet food tasted like ash. That's when my eyes drifted toward the shrine's offerings. They sat neatly on the altar, bowls of fruit, dried fish wrapped in paper, sweet rice cakes dusted with powder. Each one placed carefully, untouched, unchanged since I arrived. The rules had been clear, leave offerings untouched. But my head throbbed with hunger, and the memory of the forest wouldn't leave me. Those trees, those faces, my face, watching me, recording me, whispering. It was as though the faces weren't just carved into the wood, but burned into the inside of my eyelids. Every time I blinked, I saw myself staring back, sap dripping from my mouth. By lantern light, the offerings looked different. Not stale. Not rotten. They seemed new. Fresh. The rice cakes gleamed faintly, the fruit practically glowed. My stomach growled loud enough to echo against the wooden walls. And I broke. I told myself it was survival, that it was just one bite, that surely the old caretaker had exaggerated. My hands shook as I lifted the rice cake, the powder soft against my fingers, sweet-smelling. I bit into it. It was warm. Freshly made. The sweetness filled my mouth, but with it came something else, a metallic tang beneath the sugar, like blood hidden under honey. I gagged, swallowing hard, my throat working against me. But I couldn't stop. I ate another. And another. By the time I realized what I'd done, the offering plate was empty. And the shrine was no longer silent. It began with a creak, deep in the wood, like the groan of old beams settling. Then came another. And another. Soon the whole shrine seemed to shift and breathe, the walls expanding and contracting as though alive. I staggered back, clutching my stomach. The lantern flame sputtered as if in a sudden draft, though no wind entered the sealed room. Then came the sound. Knocking. Not just at the door this time. From the walls, the floorboards, the ceiling above. A chorus of knocks, uneven, rhythmic, like bones tapping against wood. My heart froze in my chest. And then the voices joined. Dozens of them. Whispering, chanting, layered over each other. Wooden voices, splintering, cracking, each syllable rasping like breath forced through bark. Face, 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 I pressed my palms over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices burrowed into me, vibrating through the beams of the shrine itself. The knocking grew louder, harder. The door bulged inward with each strike, the wood bending as if something vast pressed against it from the outside. The carvings above the door twisted, their mouths opening wide, teeth splitting through bark. The shrine itself was suffocating me. My lantern flared, then died, plunging me into blackness. The only light came from the faint glow of the offerings, no, not offerings anymore. The empty plates shimmered faintly, as though feeding on me instead. The knocking stopped. Silence swallowed everything. And then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Deep, ragged, wet breaths, pulling in and out against the door. The wood swelled with each inhale, then sank with each exhale, as though the shrine itself had lungs. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. My body was stone, my stomach cramping with the offerings I'd eaten. Then, slowly, the door began to open. Not with a slam. Not with force. But with a slow, careful creak, as if whatever stood outside didn't need to break the rules of the shrine to enter. The gap widened inch by inch. Moonlight spilled through, illuminating dust motes that twisted in unnatural patterns. And beyond the threshold, figures. Dozens of them, gathered in the courtyard. Their bodies thin, splintered, as if carved from wood but animated, joints cracking with each twitch. Their faces, every one a carving from the shrine walls. Wide eyes, screaming mouths, hollow sockets. They swayed together, chanting in those splintering voices, words breaking like dry twigs, face. Face. Face, my knees buckled. I fell against the altar, knocking the empty plates to the floor. They shattered, the sound sharp, final. The wooden figures surged forward. I slammed the door shut before they could enter, the wood rattling under my palms. My breath tore from my chest, shallow, panicked. I pressed my weight against the door, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The shrine itself seemed complicit, breathing with them, feeding with them. From outside came a sound that froze me completely. My own voice. Calling softly. Pleading. Let me in. I ran. The door wouldn't hold for long. I could feel the shrine shuddering beneath my hands, as if the wood itself wanted to push me out and hand me over. So I did the only thing left, I bolted into the night, stumbling down the mountain path with nothing but moonlight and panic to guide me. The forest was alive. Branches clawed at my face, roots snagged my ankles, and every tree seemed to lean closer, their carved faces watching as I passed. Some smiled. Others wept resin. I didn't dare stop to look too closely. By the time I reached the village, I was breathless and half delirious. The lanterns in the square burned low, but people were still awake. A group had gathered outside the shop where I usually bought rice, their silhouettes flickering in the dim light. I staggered toward them, desperate. Please, you have to help me. The shrine, it's alive, there are things out there, they're coming. The villagers turned slowly, their faces calm, too calm. The shopkeeper, the old woman with thin lips and cloudy eyes, stepped forward. She looked at me with something between pity and inevitability. You ate the offerings, didn't you? She asked softly. I froze. My stomach twisted with shame. I didn't have a choice. I was starving, her eyes closed as if she'd heard this before. They never do. Behind her, the others murmured, voices like wind rustling through leaves. My panic rose. You knew. You knew this would happen. Why didn't you tell me the truth? The shopkeeper's hands shook as she held up a small carving knife. Not threatening, ritualistic. The shrine demands caretakers. Always has. Without them, the forest spreads, takes everything. We give it what it wants, faces, voices, bodies. In return, the village survives. My blood ran cold. You feed it people. Her cloudy eyes met mine. We feed it you. I stumbled back, but the villagers closed in. Their shadows flickered long and sharp across the walls, and I realized with sick horror that many of them carried small masks, carved from wood, crude but deliberate. Faces. Offerings. The shopkeeper stepped closer, whispering so only I could hear. My brother once broke the rules. We thought the shrine would forgive him. But it doesn't forgive. It remembers. It remembered him, and now it remembers you. I turned and ran before they could stop me. Their voices followed, low chants, prayers, bargains. And in the distance, carried by the wind, the faces in the forest whispered my name.